They asked her to give up her seat, not for a mother with a baby, not for a medical emergency, but for a man in a tailored overcoat who didn't even glance her way. Dr. Aria Bennett had been in the terminal since 5:35 a.m. Gate C12, Concourse F at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International. It was a chilly Thursday, and she liked having extra time before boarding. No rushing, no scrambling, just calm. Her seat, 2A first class, left window. She'd chosen it weeks ago, right after her keynote was confirmed. The summit in Palo Alto wasn't just another conference, it was the conference. Every major tech CEO would be there. She was opening the event. Aria wore a gray blazer over a sand-colored mock neck, minimalist gold earrings and soft white sneakers. Her locks were swept into a low bun, tight and professional. She looked like what she was, someone who built something with her mind. Boarding began without issue. Group 1 was called. Aria walked calmly to the scanner, nodded at the agent, scanned her pass, and stepped on board Skylift Atlantic Flight 408. She'd flown this airline before. No drama. She placed her carry-on overhead, pulled out her iPad, and slid into seat 2A. It was her small ritual. Sit, exhale, recalibrate. She opened a folder titled Day 1, Neural Defense Keynote. Slides, notes, reminders. This was her domain. She was ready. But then came the pause. "Miss Bennett?" Aria looked up. A flight attendant in crimson-red lipstick and an immaculate bun stood in the aisle beside her. Her name tag read Elaine M. Her tone was courteous, but stiff. "Yes? There seems to have been a seating error," Elaine said, eyes scanning a tablet. "We need to ask you to relocate to seat 21C while we resolve it." Aria blinked. "I booked this seat. It was confirmed." "I understand, but we also have a Platinum Pinnacle member assigned here." Aria didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, "And I'm not one?" Elaine didn't respond directly. "Seat 21C is still in economy," she added quickly, "but we'll do our best to make it temporary." Aria didn't say another word. She tapped the side of her iPad and opened the camera. Hit record, quietly. Then she stood, took her bag, and walked to row 21. A white man in his late 50s boarded right after. Gray coat, loafers, carrying nothing but a leather folio. He slid into 2A without hesitation, adjusted the recline, and accepted a pre-flight espresso as if he were royalty. The attendant smiled at him, not the tight smile she gave Aria, but the kind of warmth reserved for frequent flyers and donors at museum galas. Aria, meanwhile, sat crammed between a high schooler watching TikToks and a man with persistent allergies. She said nothing, but her camera had caught it all, and in 5 minutes, that video would be the least powerful thing in her arsenal. Because Dr. Aria Bennett wasn't just another name on the passenger manifest. She was the co-founder and CEO of Neuralinks, the cutting-edge AI firm Triton Ventures had just acquired for $540 million. The same Triton that happened to own Skylift Atlantic Airlines. She had just stepped off a video call with Triton's executive VP the night before, finalizing rollout plans for Neuralinks to redesign the entire passenger biometric ID system for Skylift Atlantic. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had no idea who she was, and that's exactly how she liked it, until they gave her a reason to remind them. Seat 21C was as uncomfortable as she'd expected, cramped, fluorescent, and too close to the restroom door that clicked open every 4 minutes. Aria folded her coat tightly over her lap and adjusted her posture, arms boxed in on either side. The teenager beside her had cranked up the volume on some video game soundtrack, and the man in 21A sniffled audibly into a napkin. Aria didn't flinch. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for clarity. She tapped her iPad again, not to review her keynote, but to reread the brief outline of the biometric upgrade proposal. She needed to keep her mind grounded, but the small rectangular weight of her phone in her pocket said otherwise. The video was saved. The voice, the words, the smile. It was all there. Evidence wasn't just for courtrooms. Sometimes it was for memory, for precision, for when people pretended something didn't happen, and you needed to remind them, gently, firmly, that it had. Aria scrolled down to her email app. No fury, no paragraph-long rants, just precision. 2. Jonathan Clay, EVP of Operations, Triton Ventures. Subject: Incident on Skylift Flight 408. Jonathan, I've just been removed from my confirmed seat in 2A on Flight 408 for a Platinum Pinnacle guest, without protocol or prior explanation. As of now, I am seated in 21C. As this flight is operated by a subsidiary of Triton Ventures, and considering our pending rollout of Neuralink's infrastructure across your fleet, I trust you'll treat this as more than a seating issue. AB, she hit send. It wasn't about the seat. It never was. It was about the reflex of a system trained to see status a certain way, and to miss it entirely when it came dressed in the wrong tone of skin, or the wrong texture of hair, or the wrong part of the alphabet in someone's last name. She didn't need to scream that truth into the cabin. She'd just written it directly to the one man who oversaw every operations officer in the airline group. At that moment, the man in 2A ordered a second espresso. She saw it from down the aisle. Elaine smiling, nodding, retreating toward the galley like nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed. One vibration. Tasha Brewster, her executive coordinator, had replied, "Just check the summit site. You're now listed top and center on the homepage. Banner photo, big smile, full bio. Aria smiled faintly, then typed back, "Let's see if the airline knows who I am now." It wasn't a threat. It was a hypothesis. Above her, the overhead light flickered. The captain's voice came on, welcoming passengers aboard, listing weather conditions over California. Aria leaned her head to the side, careful not to brush elbows with her seatmates. Then another buzz. This time, it was from Jonathan Clay himself. "Received. Will escalate. You'll hear from us before touchdown." She stared at the words for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. Back in the galley, things had begun to shift. The lead flight attendant returned down the aisle, her gait slightly stiffer, eyes less confident. Something behind the curtain had changed. Maybe it was a call from dispatch. Maybe it was a message on the crew tablet. But Elaine no longer carried the breezy assurance she had 20 minutes earlier. Arya noticed. She always noticed. She didn't say a word. She simply reopened the email app and began drafting a second message, this time copying the legal and PR teams from Triton. She kept it short, factual, neutral in tone. The kind of language that wasn't angry, but unmistakably loaded. A few rows ahead, a woman in a Stanford hoodie leaned over to whisper to her friend, "Isn't that the AI lady from TechBridge?" Her friend squinted, then nodded slowly. Arya didn't respond. She didn't need to. You can't always choose how you're seen, but you can choose what you do when someone makes the mistake of looking past you. Another buzz, another text. "FYI," Tasha wrote, "Triton PR just pinged me. They want to confirm if you're on Flight 408. You good?" Arya replied with a single word. "Solid." The plane began to ascend. The captain turned off the seatbelt sign. Arya placed her phone face down on the tray table and leaned back slightly, just enough to feel the firm resistance of the economy seat cushion against her spine. She wasn't uncomfortable. She was focused. That's when the intercom crackled again. Not the captain this time. Just a short click, followed by indistinct murmurs near the cockpit door. Something was happening. Something small, but seismic. From behind her, Elaine's voice appeared again. Softer now. Tentative. "Dr. Bennett," she said, stopping just short of a whisper. "We've just been informed that there was a significant mix-up regarding your original seat. We'd be happy to move you back to 2A immediately. It's open now." Arya turned her head slowly. Not surprised, not smug, just certain. "Did the other passenger leave?" Elaine hesitated. "He offered to switch." Arya raised one brow, calm as still water. "Or was he told?" The silence that followed said enough. Arya didn't blink. "I'll stay here." Elaine's face twitched. "Are you sure?" "You don't have to." "I'm sure." It wasn't about reclaiming the seat. It was about making the system sit in what it had done. It was about not letting them wash away the moment with convenience. Sometimes the best form of correction is stillness. Elaine swallowed. "Of course, if you need anything." Arya cut her off gently. "I'd like to speak with the captain before we land." The request hung there like fog. The Captain? Elaine's voice cracked. Yes, please let him know. The attendant nodded, her eyes darting down toward her tablet like it could hide her embarrassment. Arya turned back toward the tray table and lifted her phone. She pressed play on the video, not loud, just enough that the woman seated next to her could hear the phrase, "Unfortunately, we need to seat the other passenger immediately." That was all it took. The woman beside her looked over, eyes wide, then muttered under her breath, "That's cold." Arya didn't answer. The ripple had begun, and the sky wasn't high enough to contain it. She didn't need to check her watch to know the descent had begun. The subtle shift in posture around her, the tilt of the cabin, the soft hum changing pitch, it was all familiar. The seatbelt sign hadn't lit up yet, but the atmosphere signaled something was landing soon. Not just the plane. Arya remained composed in 21st century. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, her phone screen now dark but not idle. She wasn't recording anymore. She didn't need to. The real message had already been delivered. She didn't fidget. She didn't breathe any differently. She simply waited. And right on cue, the cockpit door opened. The captain emerged, tall, salt and pepper hair combed neatly, the crisp navy uniform stiff at the shoulders. He walked with the deliberate pace of someone used to leading quietly, until today. He made his way down the aisle, ignoring glances from curious passengers. He didn't pause until he reached row 21. "Dr. Bennett," he said. Arya didn't stand. She met his gaze calmly. "Yes. I've been informed about the error regarding your seat," he said, voice carefully measured. "I'd like to offer a personal apology. This is not reflective of our standards." She tilted her head slightly, observing. "You're the captain of this flight?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then allow me to ask you something directly." "Of course." Her tone didn't rise. Her words didn't bite, but they landed with precision. "If I looked like him," she said, gesturing subtly toward the front, where the man in 2A now slept, reclined and shoeless, "would this have happened?" The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence. 3 seconds passed, not out of hesitation, but because nothing he could say would be more honest than the pause itself. The captain's jaw clenched faintly. His lips moved as if considering a reply that wouldn't betray him. Arya nodded once, slowly. "That's what I thought." There was no malice in her voice, just clarity. The stillness that followed wasn't hostile. It was simply weighted, the kind that settled over a conversation when truth was acknowledged, even without being spoken. "I understand," she added quietly, "that mistakes happen, but recognition shouldn't require a LinkedIn profile to be accurate." The captain shifted his stance, then lowered his voice. "The matter will be formally reported. The crew will be reviewed." "I'm not here to file complaints," Arya replied. "I'm here to ensure your system learns who it overlooks, before it ends up in another cabin full of strangers watching it happen." He nodded once more, then turned, straightened his back, and walked the aisle as if it had grown twice as long. Arya returned her gaze to the window. The clouds had begun to thin. Northern California's outline appeared in patches, hints of pavement and rooftops beneath a mist of sun. The city didn't look ready, but she was. People were watching now. They had heard fragments, caught facial shifts, sensed tension. They didn't need the full story to understand that something had gone wrong. Something about respect. Something about visibility. Something that wasn't as invisible anymore. Arya unlocked her phone. A new message from Tasha. "Rumors are circulating. A few people on board may have recognized you already. Just checking in. You good?" She replied, "Let them connect the dots." The seatbelt sign chimed. A final round of checks began. The lead attendant passed again, this time not making eye contact. Her steps slower, her smile long gone. The scripted confidence had eroded, replaced with the kind of cautious energy that comes from knowing eyes are on you. And this time, not with admiration. The descent continued. Phones were off, but the awareness wasn't. What had started as a quiet swap of seats had turned into something much harder to undo, a question that couldn't be unasked. Arya didn't reclaim her seat. She didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't sitting back in 2A. What mattered was making sure they remembered exactly why she had been removed from it. The wheels touched the runway like a whispered apology. Smooth, careful, too late. Flight 408 taxied slowly toward the gate at San Francisco International Airport. Passengers began to stir, stretching arms, unbuckling belts, checking for signal bars. A chorus of polite rustling filled the cabin, but no one was really relaxed. Not entirely. Something had changed midair. Everyone could feel it. Arya remained seated. She always let others rush first. Today, even more so. The man in 2A disembarked ahead of everyone, of course. Still unaware, still oblivious. He didn't glance back once. Not at the seat he'd been gifted, not at the woman he'd displaced. To him, it had been just another routine flight, another upgrade handed to him without resistance. He didn't know his comfort had cost his flight crew their stability. Arya stood only after the aisle cleared. She adjusted her coat, slipped her phone into her pocket, and lifted her carry-on with one hand. She stepped off the plane without fanfare. Two men in dark suits stood waiting by the gate. They weren't TSA. No badges, no clipboards, no small talk. Just neutral posture and dark ties with a small, subtle insignia, a silver trident pin on the lapel. Triton Ventures. "Dr. Bennett?" the taller one asked. She paused but didn't flinch. "Yes. We've been instructed to escort you to the Skylift Executive Lounge. Mr. Clay would like to speak with you directly." Arya blinked once. "Now! Now!" She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She nodded and followed them down the terminal, past the luggage carousels, past the crowd of bleary-eyed travelers and the eager greeters with cardboard signs. Terminal 3 blurred around her. Her stride was calm, composed, a quiet contrast to the swirl of energy following behind. Phones were already buzzing. Passengers from her flight were talking. One woman who had noticed her earlier discreetly snapped a photo from across the food court. And just like that, the story grew new wings. Inside the Skylift Executive Lounge, everything smelled of lemon oil and money. Polished walnut, low light, soundproofed walls. The kind of luxury designed to silence chaos, not confront it. Jonathan Clay was already standing near the back, next to a frosted glass conference room. Clean-shaven, wearing a navy sweater over an open collar, sleeves slightly rolled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept much and had just started a crisis playbook he hoped he'd never need. "Dr. Bennett," he said, stepping forward. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't sit. "I appreciate you coming," he began. "I'd like to start by offering a formal apology on behalf of Skylift Atlantic, on behalf of Triton Ventures, and on behalf of myself." "An apology doesn't fix a pattern," Arya said, voice low but clear. "It only patches a symptom." Clay nodded like a man who'd been bracing for impact. "We're launching an internal investigation," he continued. "The flight crew from 408 has been suspended, pending review. That process is already in motion." Arya raised an eyebrow. "That fast? You were removed from a reserved seat by a team who failed protocol, failed verification, and failed perception," he said. "There's no excuse, and if I didn't have your number saved, we'd still be reading your email Monday morning, after it hit the press." His honesty wasn't performative. It was practiced, like a man who knew he couldn't spin this. Not to her. "What else?" she asked. "We'd like to invite you to join our Internal Equity and Operations Review Board," he said, "to help us reform flight protocol, training, bias mitigation, full access." No NDA. Arya tilted her head. "You want me to clean up the mess your people created. I want you to help fix what we didn't see until it became undeniable," Clay replied. She folded her arms. "I didn't build this system," she said, "but I know exactly how it functions. And I know what happens when it collides with someone it misjudges." He said nothing. "So here's what I will do," she continued. "I'll speak at your next leadership summit, on stage, on record, about this flight, about what it means when a black woman is quietly moved to the back of the plane, and no one blinks. Not even the ones paid to know better." Clay's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "And after that," Arya added, "I'll decide whether I want to help you fix it." She didn't yell. She didn't storm out. She picked up her bag and walked toward the exit like a CEO who had just concluded a boardroom negotiation on her terms. Because that's exactly what she'd done. Outside the lounge, the hallway seemed brighter, cleaner, even quieter than before. By the next morning, news outlets didn't use capital letters or red banners. They just told the truth. Black CEO removed from first-class seat for white passenger. Airline crew under review, corporate leadership responds after viral incident. The future of visibility, Aria Bennett speaks up. But the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the hush that fell over a cabin at 38,000 feet when someone finally decided not to let it go. 2 weeks later, the stage was ready. Not a TED Talk, not a fireside chat. This was the Triton Leadership Summit, held inside a sprawling conference hall in downtown Phoenix. Polished marble, wireless translation booths, and lanyards that cost more than some people's rent. The screen behind the podium lit up with a single name, Dr. Aria Bennett, CEO and co-founder. Neurolinks, Shaksh, keynote speaker, no music. No walk-up video. Just her, stepping forward in charcoal slacks and a deep green blouse. No branding, no logos, no distractions. The mic was already clipped to her collar. The room, filled with over 400 executives, went still. She didn't start with a thank you. She didn't crack a joke. She simply looked out at the crowd and said, 12 days ago, I boarded Flight 408 from Atlanta to San Francisco. Every head lifted, every tablet stilled. I was booked in seat 2A. I'd chosen it weeks in advance. But when I boarded, a flight attendant asked me to move to 21C for a platinum passenger who had requested my seat. She paused. Let it breathe. No explanation, no verification. Just quiet removal. Efficient. Polite. Like it had been practiced before. There were no gasps, only stillness. The kind that comes when people are hearing something they've sensed before, but never had to name. The man who replaced me never looked back. He didn't need to. The system had already told him that his comfort mattered more. She walked once to the left, slowly. And the woman who asked me to move? She smiled the whole time, but it wasn't a smile of service. It was a smile of certainty, because she was certain I wasn't supposed to be there. Then she stopped walking. This is what we're talking about when we talk about assumption. Not malice, not slurs, just assumption that I was upgradable, replaceable, movable. A few heads lowered, others stiffened. She let that discomfort sit. Here's what the crew didn't know. I'm not someone's plus one. I'm not a consultant trying to get noticed. I'm not even an invited guest. I'm the CEO of a company your airline now owns. That hit differently. She saw it in the posture shifts. And yet none of that mattered, because when systems are designed around comfort and pattern, they stop being able to see, even when what they're missing is sitting right in front of them. She stepped back to center. I didn't shout on that plane. I didn't post the video. I didn't tag the airline. Why? She looked around the room. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the system reveal itself, then choose when and how to respond. The room was so still you could hear someone cap their pen. You don't have to mean harm to cause it, but once you see the harm, you don't get to pretend you didn't. What you do next? That's your leadership. She paused, not for effect, but because the next part mattered most. I'm not here to embarrass your company. I'm here to challenge it. You invited me here not because I complained, but because I was right. And now you have a choice. Not to make a statement, but to make a change. The silence cracked, just slightly, with a slow, steady wave of applause. Not polite, not reflexive, but grounded. 3 rows back, a VP from Skylift stood, then another from Triton Logistics, then one from Human Capital. It spread like a current. No standing ovation, just standing. Afterward, people waited to speak with her, not to apologize, but to ask, how do we start? How do we audit what we can't see? How do we listen better? And Aria didn't give them slogans. She gave them structure, strategy, sent them back with more than just inspiration. She gave them responsibility. A week later, a hiring director emailed her asking to consult on training protocols. A regional officer asked her to review their escalation hierarchy. Another offered her a board seat for the Diversity and Systems Integrity Task Force. She didn't say yes to everything, but she didn't say no, because this wasn't about her seat. It was about the thousands of people just like her who were quietly moved, overlooked, bypassed, and didn't have a microphone waiting when they landed. Her story had just become their mirror, and now no one could pretend they hadn't seen what they'd. The summit had ended. The applause had faded. The headlines had cooled into analysis. and Aria Bennett had gone back to work. Not the spotlight kind of work, the real work. The kind that happened in windowless offices and early morning calls. The kind that never made the press release. Updating security models, onboarding new teams, mapping out integration timelines between Neuralinks and Skylift's biometric ID system. The kind of work people assumed she oversaw, but in reality she still led. Her inbox, once neatly controlled, had doubled in velocity. Requests, offers, invitations to speak, to consult, to advise. She answered a few, ignored many. She wasn't looking for a circuit. She was looking for systems that were ready to face themselves. And then one afternoon, a letter arrived. A real one. Paper. Ink. No subject line. No branding. Just a soft cream envelope with her name handwritten in the corner. Inside, Dr. Bennett. I was on flight 408. I didn't say anything. I didn't even realize what had happened at first. I was in 5C, close enough to see you walk to the back. Too far to know why. But then I watched the crew fidget. I heard whispers ripple down the aisle. I saw the man in 2A sip his whiskey like the world owed him silence. And I saw you, still, composed, exact. You didn't yell. You didn't make a scene. But somehow everyone in that cabin felt what had happened, even the ones pretending not to. And then, a few days later, I saw your name in the news, your face on the summit banner. I just wanted you to know. You didn't have to raise your voice. We heard you anyway. Thank you. Aria read it twice, then folded it gently and slid it into the inner sleeve of her notebook. Not out of vanity, but remembrance. Not everyone on that plane had ignored it. Some had simply needed time to process what they'd witnessed. Some didn't have the vocabulary yet. Some didn't know that a quiet moment could be a turning point. This was never about the crew, not entirely. It was about who gets noticed and who gets normalized, about the systems that teach people to look for authority in the familiar and invisibility in anything that challenges it. She thought about all the times she had been mistaken for someone else, the assistant, the intern, the driver, the +1. She remembered the conference where a sponsor asked if she was one of the scholarship kids, the executive dinner where someone handed her a valet ticket, the elevator ride where a junior engineer explained her own software back to her. Slowly, like he thought he was helping. And she thought about the people who had seen it all, but said nothing, until now. This letter wasn't grand, it wasn't viral, but it mattered, because it confirmed something Aria already suspected. Change doesn't always come from outrage. Sometimes it begins with awareness. And awareness, once awakened, spreads. Later that night, she opened a blank document titled simply, What They Don't Teach You in Leadership Training. At the top, she typed, The real test of leadership isn't what you do when you're seen. It's what you allow to happen when you think no one's watching. She didn't know yet what the document would become. A keynote? A curriculum? A memo to herself? It didn't matter. The words were there now, like echoes still ringing from a cabin at 38,000 feet, and she intended to follow them wherever they led. It began with a PDF, a 57-page internal training manual from Skylift Atlantic's onboarding division, forwarded discreetly to Aria by Jonathan Clay. No cover letter, just a subject line. Transparency as promised. Let me know where you'd start. She read it once through, then again, slower. The document was clean, branded, glossy with the confidence of corporate design. Page after page outlined procedure, etiquette, conflict de-escalation, friendly diagrams, mandatory scripts, a code of customer conduct framed more like hospitality than hierarchy. But something was missing, or rather, someone. In all 57 pages, there were no mentions of bias recognition, no training scenarios involving passenger profiling, status assumption, or escalation based on appearance. There were dozens of bullet points about how to offer champagne, nothing about how to check unconscious bias when offering apologies. There were flowcharts on how to upgrade VIPs, no protocol for verifying whether the person already in the seat might be the VIP. It was polished, yes, but blind. Aria closed the file and sat back. This wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror. The crew on Flight 408 hadn't broken a rule. They'd followed the wrong blueprint. She opened a blank page, began to sketch the layers. Assumption, action, escalation, exposure. A cycle, a loop, a system that didn't need to be malicious to be dangerous. The woman on the plane hadn't hated Arya. She just hadn't recognized her. Not her face, not her presence, not her authority, because the system never asked her to learn how. Arya scrolled back to page 16 of the PDF, a section titled Passenger Prioritization Protocol. The phrasing struck her. Prioritization, not protection. Efficiency, not equity. She added another note. What happens when your people are trained to serve speed, but not taught to recognize power when it comes in an unexpected form? That was the real pivot. Not policy, but perception. Not retraining action, but recalibrating attention. A few hours later, her calendar pinged. A joint meeting had been scheduled. Skylift's Director of Crew Operations, Triton's Vice President of People Systems, and Arya. The invite was titled Internal Protocol Realignment Phase 1. She showed up with one slide, just one. Black text on white background, no graphics, no logo. It read, Respect that has to be requested is not respect, it's reaction. She let it sit there for 6 seconds, long enough for someone to shift uncomfortably. Then she spoke. You don't have a people problem. You have a perception model that was never built to see certain people as central. You've taught your crew how to move fast. You haven't taught them how to look carefully. She clicked again. A second slide appeared. This one read, If it takes a scandal to start training your team in human dignity, you're not too late, but you're dangerously behind. The room was still. No one interrupted, so she went on. Calm, clear. What happened on that flight wasn't extraordinary. What made it viral was who I was. That's a problem, because every other version of me, every woman, every person of color, every quiet professional in a hoodie instead of a blazer, they're getting moved every day, and no one's filming it. A senior director nodded slowly. What do you suggest? Someone finally asked. She smiled faintly. Start with reordering what you think matters. If your training teaches attendants how to pour a second glass of wine but not how to verify that the woman in 2A earned that seat, then you've trained them to look at comfort, not context. Let's fix that. That was the beginning. The meeting ended without applause. But 2 hours later, Arya received an updated draft of a new Skylift crew module. Subject line, Bias Interrupt Protocol, Draft 01. Inside, new language on status verification, revised scripts for seat disputes, role-play exercises on assumption versus evidence. A quote from her keynote embedded at the start. They hadn't asked permission to include it. She didn't mind, because for once, they were listening without being told to. The email came in just after midnight, no subject line, no signature banner, just a name Arya didn't recognize. Levi T. Delgado. The body of the message was short, almost abrupt. Hi, Dr. Bennett. I was in seat 22B on flight 408, one row behind you. I saw what happened. I heard it too. This might sound strange, but I didn't write to praise you. You've already had more applause than most people get in a lifetime. I'm writing because I think you missed something. And maybe I did too, but I hope we can both learn from it. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. I have something to give you. Levi. At first, she almost archived it. No credentials, no context. And she'd grown tired of the pseudo-ally fan mail dressed as reflection. But something about the tone made her pause. Not reverent, not angry, just unresolved. She replied the next morning. Levi, I'm listening. Arya. They met 3 days later, a small cafe near Dolores Park in San Francisco, the kind of place with chipped mugs, laminated menus, and real conversations. Levi was already seated when she arrived, late 30s, denim jacket, service dog harness resting by his feet. He stood to greet her, extending a prosthetic hand with no hesitation. Thank you for coming, he said. They sat. Arya didn't ask what happened to his hand. She didn't need to, and he didn't explain. You said I missed something, she said after the waitress left. I did. He nodded slowly. But it's not what you think. He reached into his bag and placed a small spiral notebook on the table. Its cover was torn, the pages frayed. I was writing when they asked you to move. I didn't know who you were. I just saw it. Arya stayed quiet. I recorded it in here, he said. Not video, just words. I write what I see. It helps with the PTSD. Helps me make sense of things before they leave me. He opened the notebook, skipped a few pages. Woman in 2A moved. Didn't argue. Smile too tight. Attendant too calm. Man in coat. No eye contact. Something unspoken. Cabin shifts. Feels wrong. He closed it. I was never going to show this to anyone, he continued. But after your summit talk, I realized you told one story from that day. Yours. And it was true. But there were more. Arya nodded slowly. You felt erased too. Yes, he said simply. But not in the same way. I've been moved off flights before. Not because of my skin color, but because of my leg. Because my dog makes people nervous. Because I look unstable. I get flagged for behavior without speaking. Arya looked at him, not in pity, but recognition. I've watched gate agents talk to my brother instead of me. I've had flight attendants explain the exit row rules like I'm a liability, not a human. He leaned forward. So when I saw you, being moved, being dismissed, being repositioned, I knew what that was. But you didn't see me watching. And maybe in your story, people like me don't exist. The words landed like truth. Not an accusation, but an offering. Arya exhaled slowly. You're right, she said. I didn't see you. I was so focused on what was happening to me, I forgot to look behind me. He smiled. That's the part we never talk about. That sometimes when we're surviving our own invisibility, we stop seeing others too. They sat in silence. 2 passengers, 2 stories, 1 cabin. Then he slid the notebook across the table. This is yours now. Do whatever you want with it. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she looked him in the eyes. You helped me remember something I forgot, she said. That even the most powerful voice needs to be taught how to listen again. Especially when it's been heard too much. He nodded. You spoke for many of us. But now you can carry more than just your part. They shook hands again. No photos, no tweets. Just respect exchanged in full. That night back at her apartment, Arya opened the notebook again. Page after page of Levi's sketches, notes, partial poems, snippets of strangers he'd observed. The way a child on the plane had hugged their stuffed bear during turbulence. All of it was there. Proof that being unseen doesn't mean you're not witnessing. And Arya, whose voice had filled conference halls and boardrooms, felt something unfamiliar. The deep need to grow quiet again. To make space for the ones behind her. Not because she was stepping aside, but because now she knew. The most powerful kind of leadership isn't the kind that speaks over people. It's the kind that knows when to turn around and listen. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Skylift's internal protocol task force had gathered in a sleek, glass-paneled conference room on the 12th floor of the Triton Ventures building. 12 chairs, 8 executives, 3 HR specialists, 1 empty seat, Arya's. She arrived at 9:02, not late, calculated. She placed a manila folder on the table. No laptop, no PowerPoint, just that one file. Before we begin, she said, I'd like to submit something for your review. She slid the folder across the table to the director of passenger experience, a tall man with a polished voice and polished discomfort. Inside were 20 printed pages, photocopies from Levi Delgado's notebook. Not edited, not summarized, not anonymized. Real handwriting, raw words, margin notes, truths. She let them read. 5 pages in, someone cleared their throat. 8 pages in, someone stopped pretending to skim. 10 pages in, the head of legal shifted in her seat. And when they reached the section that read, I've been flagged more times than I can count. Not because I misbehaved, because I made someone else nervous by existing, because my service dog breathes louder than comfort likes. No one spoke. Then the director asked, This is from a passenger? Yes, Arya said. Seat 22B. He watched what happened on Flight 408, and he remembered it in detail because it mirrored something he lives through all the time. Another executive frowned slightly. This is powerful, but how do we verify? Arya raised a hand. You're asking the wrong question. He froze. You don't need to verify his pain. You need to verify why it took a handwritten notebook to tell you what your reports never captured. Silence. She stood slowly and walked toward the whiteboard at the front of the room. In neat handwriting, she wrote, "Protocol is what we train. Behavior is what we allow. Culture is what we ignore." Then turned around. "You say you want a safer airline. Then start by listening to the people you've taught your staff to overlook, not as case studies, as co-authors." Someone near the end of the table interjected, "Look, I don't think anyone here is against inclusivity, but we do have to be careful about opening the floodgates to anecdotal data. One story doesn't make a system." Arya didn't blink. "You're right," she said. "One story doesn't make a system. But when your system refuses to acknowledge even one story, that's exactly how the harm stays invisible." She stepped back from the board. "What happened to me made the headlines. What happened to Levi didn't. That's the point. He lives the quiet version of what you just watched explode in PR. The kind that doesn't trend. The kind that erodes people, not brands." The head of training, a woman in her 50s with silver at her temples and sincerity in her voice, finally spoke. "What are you proposing exactly?" Arya didn't hesitate. "You're about to roll out a new bias interrupt training module. You're using my name in it, my story, my image. That's fine, but it's incomplete." She opened the folder again, this time pulling out a second document, a printed statement of intent. At the top, bolded, "Passenger-centered training, narrative inclusion proposal." I want real passenger experiences embedded into every crew training cycle. Not in a footnote, not in an appendix, in the actual curriculum. First-person accounts of what it feels like to be profiled, repositioned, silenced. She looked around the room. "Not just mine, Levi's, others. You've collected enough incident reports to fill a wall, but none of them have been turned into teachable humanity." The room shifted again, this time less in resistance, more in reckoning. Because deep down they knew. They had the data. They had the surveys. They had the feedback forms marked anonymous. But what they lacked, what they'd always lacked, was the courage to center someone else's experience as truth, not testimonial. The director of passenger experience finally asked, quieter now, "And if we agree?" Arya closed the folder. "Then you're no longer just responding to the viral story. You're redesigning the entire narrative." Pause. "And if you don't," she added. She didn't need to finish that sentence. Everyone in that room knew the cost of being late to a reckoning twice. 20 minutes later, the proposal was adopted, unanimously. The training department would begin collecting real passenger narratives for integration. A new internal role would be created, Director of Narrative Equity, and Arya would help vet the first hire. The notebook stayed in her bag, but its voice had already entered the room. Levi had become a co-author in a system that once erased him, not because he demanded a platform, but because Arya stepped aside just enough to make room for someone else's truth. And in that act, not of power, but of humility, the culture began to shift. It arrived in a small envelope. No return address, no logo, just her name in soft cursive ink. Inside was a card, handmade, the edges slightly uneven, and a letter, printed neatly on lined paper, in handwriting that looked like it had been traced more than once to get it right. "Dear Dr. Arya Bennett, you don't know me. I was in seat 3F on flight 408. I was 12 years old. I was flying alone for the first time. My mom had packed me a lunchbox and told me to be brave. I was excited and scared. I didn't know what to expect. I watched you get on the plane. You looked like you belonged everywhere. I remember because I thought, that's the kind of woman I want to be when I grow up. But then they made you move. They didn't yell. You didn't either. You just stood up and walked down the aisle. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something was wrong. I wanted to say something, but I was just a kid, and no one else did, so I stayed quiet. When we landed, I saw the way the flight attendants looked nervous, the way people whispered, and I saw you standing tall, still calm, but something in your eyes had changed. I thought about that flight for days, then weeks. Then I found your name online, and I saw everything. The articles, the talk, the change. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just showed them. I never forgot that. The letter continued, the ink darker in places where the writer had pressed harder. Now I'm 18. I just got into MIT. I want to build things that help people be seen. I'm going to study human-centered design and data ethics. I didn't even know those were real fields until I found you. I'm writing because I think what you did mattered, even if no one had filmed it, even if it never made the news, because someone was watching, someone was learning, someone was growing up in the silence taking notes. Me. Thank you for showing me that leadership doesn't always come with a podium. Sometimes it comes with a seat you weren't supposed to give up, and a story you didn't ask to carry, but carried anyway. Sincerely, Nia M. Howard Ciat 3F Aria folded the letter slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed in deeply and set the card on her desk. It was a reminder she hadn't asked for, but one she needed. For months, she had been moving systems, rewriting policies, meeting with executives, inserting truths into rooms that had always been allergic to discomfort. She had pushed quietly but relentlessly. Sometimes she forgot why. This letter, this 12-year-old memory returned from the sky, brought her back to center. Because change doesn't always show up in public. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 3F. It watches, it remembers, it grows, and one day, it writes back. That night, Arya took out a new notebook. She hadn't used it yet. It had been a gift from Levi, one of the spares from his collection, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. On the first page, she wrote, "Legacy is not what they say about you on stage. Legacy is the 12-year-old girl who saw you move to the back and decided she'd never let that happen again." She closed the cover and left it on her desk. She no longer needed to be the loudest voice in the room. She'd made enough noise in silence. From now on, she was making space. For the ones in the next row. For the ones still whispering. For the ones who needed a seat that said, "You belong here." And maybe, just maybe, seat 3F was always meant to hold the next leader. Not the loudest, not the oldest, but the one who listened and never forgot. Arya was supposed to leave. That had been the plan. After the leadership summit, the internal policy overhaul, the new training modules, and the narrative inclusion reform, her consulting window was technically over. She had done more than expected. Quietly, completely. But change, as it turned out, wasn't so tidy. It started with a call from the CEO of Triton Ventures. Not Clay, higher. Arya let it ring twice before answering. "Dr. Bennett," the voice said, calm and practiced. "We'd like to speak with you about a longer-term proposal." She already knew what that meant. She agreed to the meeting, not out of ambition, but curiosity. They met in a boardroom overlooking San Francisco Bay. 11 people, no press, no fluff. On the table was a thick folder labeled Skylift Organizational Redesign, Phase 0. They didn't ask her to review it. They asked her to help lead it. "You've changed the way we talk about dignity," said the COO. "Now we want you to help change how we structure for it." She listened. "We're reimagining the passenger experience team from the ground up, and we want you to help us hire, design, reframe the entire vision, from protocol to promotions." She leaned back, not skeptical, just measured. "I'm not an executive assistant," she said calmly. "I don't fix what's broken and leave with a checklist." The chief strategy officer spoke next. "We don't want you to fix. We want you to co-create." There it was, a seat she hadn't been asked to move from, but a new one, created, with her in mind. She took the file home, read it, annotated it, ripped it apart. Because if she was going to stay, she wasn't going to be symbolic. She was going to be structural. The next month, they launched the new division, Human Integrity and Design Systems, HIDS, not HR, not PR. Something new, built from the intersection of real human experience and operational power. Arya took the role of Chief Integrity Architect, not because of the title, but because of the mandate. Her first act? She didn't give a speech. She sent out an anonymous, staff-wide survey asking one question. Have you ever watched something unfair happen at work and stayed silent? Why? Responses flooded in. Hundreds, then thousands. People confess to watching coworkers get passed over, passengers get profiled, managers get protected. But more than that, they confess to never being asked before. Aria created a report called The Quiet Ledger, a collection of anonymized experiences and silences. It wasn't designed to expose, it was designed to acknowledge. She held a staff session not in an auditorium, but in a circle. No podium, no title tags, no photos, just voices. One man who'd worked 19 years on the tarmac spoke for the first time about watching a younger black supervisor get overridden in front of clients. A woman from the ticketing team told a story about a time she asked a Spanish-speaking mother to step aside because her English wasn't clear. A pilot admitted to seeing a co-pilot ignore a service animal rule because the passenger looked unstable. Each story ended the same way. I didn't speak. I should have. Aria listened to them all. She didn't judge. She didn't correct. And at the end, she stood and said, "This company can't be brave in the sky if it isn't honest on the ground." They called that moment the room reset. From that point on, every employee onboarding included a voice circle. Every flight training included non-negotiable narrative scenarios from real people like Levi, like Naya, like dozens more who came forward later. Aria didn't build a brand. She redefined the baseline. And one afternoon, as she walked through Terminal 3 where it all began, she passed by a framed poster above the gate. It wasn't of her face. It wasn't a quote. It was just a single sentence next to a silhouette of a passenger seated calmly, looking out the window. What you allow is what becomes culture. Underneath, small print, HID's guiding principle, adopted 2026. She paused, not to take a picture, just to remember what it had taken. Not revenge, not noise, not fury, but persistence, precision, presence. And now, a seat that no one could take, because it had never existed until she made them see why it needed to. She sat by the window, same seat, different view. This time not on a plane, but in her office. Top floor, west-facing, where the light stayed soft past 5. Aria had been meaning to write this letter for months. Not to the board, not to the press, not to any executive. To them. The ones who were watching quietly, waiting for someone else to speak first. The ones who had been moved, dismissed, overlooked, and carried it in silence. The ones in 21C, in 3F, in 22B. She opened her notebook, the same one Levi had given her, and turned to a fresh page. Then she began to write. To the ones who didn't say anything, yet you are not weak for staying silent. You were calculating. You were surviving. You were scanning the room to see if anyone else would stand before you did. I know that feeling. I've lived in it. And if you're reading this now, I want you to know. The moment you speak doesn't have to be loud to matter. It can start with a quiet refusal, a single question, a pause that makes someone look again, or a story you write down years later, like Levi did, or a letter you send at 18, like Nia. The point isn't volume, it's truth. And truth once spoken, even once, reshapes the walls it touches. The first time I was told I didn't belong, I believed it. The second time, I questioned it. The third time, I recorded it. And the fourth time, I rewrote the policy that allowed it. That's what growth looks like. Not perfection, just evolution. I didn't set out to be a symbol. I just refused to be a misprint. So now I ask you, what seat have you been asked to give up? And when you got pushed back, did you shrink? Or did you begin drafting the blueprint for something better? If you haven't started yet, it's not too late. Begin with your story. Speak it, or write it, or whisper it to someone else who needs it. And if they try to move you again, stand tall. Let them remember, you were never just a passenger. You are a witness, a builder, a mirror. And one day when someone turns around in their row, they'll find you still seated, still here, still ready, with you, Aria. She signed it, folded it. That letter would never be mailed. It wasn't for one person. It was for the inbox the world didn't know it had, where messages like this waited to be opened by whoever needed it most. That week, her team uploaded a new internal training module, Legacy and Practice, the quiet leader's toolkit. It ended not with a quiz, not with metrics, but with a question. What would you do differently now that you've seen what silence costs? Some left the answer blank. Some wrote essays, but all of them, everyone, stayed in the seat long enough to reflect. That was the shift, not policy, presence. And far from the headlines, in gate lounges and classrooms and lunchrooms and union halls, people began to remember. You don't need a microphone to make an impact. You need a moment and the courage not to look away. Gate 12B at Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta looked almost exactly the same. Same carpet, same boarding screen, same coffee cart to the left with overpriced bottled water and banana chips no one wanted. But something in the air felt different. Aria had been invited back to speak at a closed-door summit for the Triton regional leadership teams. She wasn't required to fly commercial. They had offered a private jet, or at least a VIP car service to the executive terminal. She declined. I want to fly like everyone else, she said. Pause. Actually, not like everyone else. I want to see what everyone else sees. She booked her own flight. Coach, seat 14A, window. Not because she liked middle seats, or bad coffee, or carry-on overhead roulette. She did it because she remembered. Flight 712, San Francisco to Atlanta, Skylift Atlantic. She boarded late on purpose. Group 5. She let people go ahead. Watch the crew interact. The gate agent smiled at her. Not performative. Real. The flight attendant nodded as she entered, checked her ticket, and said, "Welcome aboard, Doctor." Bennett, glad to have you with us. It wasn't loud, wasn't rehearsed, but it was there. Recognition without a spotlight, respect without a press release. She took her seat in row 14. The engine hummed with that steady pre-takeoff rhythm. To her left in 14B sat a young man in his 20s, headphones on, laptop open to a spreadsheet. To her right, across the aisle in 14C, was an older woman in a Delta crew jacket, retired perhaps, watching passengers with trained eyes and quiet amusement. The plane filled, cabin bags clicked, seatbelts buckled, and then from 2 rows ahead, a soft voice asked, "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here?" Arya glanced up. A woman, mid-30s, blazer and jeans, holding a small notepad and a tray of drinks, looked toward the empty middle seat beside her. "I'm actually the new crew equity lead," she said softly, almost shy. "I wasn't assigned to work this flight. I just wanted to experience it." From the middle. Arya smiled, moved her bag. The woman sat, adjusted her tray. Then after a beat, "I know who you are. We studied your case file in week 1 of training, but it wasn't just about what happened. It was how you handled it." Arya said nothing at first. She just nodded. The woman looked forward again, eyes scanning the front of the cabin, then whispered, "The funny thing is, I used to think I wanted to be in first class. Now, I just want to be in a system that sees people clearly, no matter the seat." The plane lifted off, 37,000 feet in the air, and this time no one was moved. No one was overlooked. No one had to record anything to be believed. Arya opened her notebook, wrote just 3 words on the page. It stayed changed. She looked out the window. The clouds blurred below like layers of memory. Somewhere in seat 3F of another flight, another girl was watching someone get treated right, and learning that maybe she belonged in that space too. Somewhere in row 22, another Levi was flying without being questioned for breathing differently. And somewhere in 2A, a seat was still reserved, but now it came with a checklist, a policy, and a cultural protocol that couldn't forget what it once ignored. She didn't need another podium. She didn't need another quote on a wall. She just needed this, to fly, as herself, unafraid, unbothered, unmoved. And as the plane coasted toward Atlanta, she closed her notebook and rested her head gently against the cabin wall. This time, she wasn't calculating. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't defending her place. She was just flying. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Batuan sao chuyen bay trolai, arian han juok mod goi tu chuyen facham. Kong ko logo kongti, kong ko fong bi vang quien lok. Chila mod bi tuku, giai hoi san, net mukshan ngatim. Gok trai, net chunam gyoi, hoing hieng. Sept, T. Arlo retired, Skylift Atlantic, Kongoy Trongban Fong, An Sang Boy Xiotrai Dai Trenban. Motura, Hong Voy. Ben Trong La Mot Togiai Duinhat, Gap Joy Kentan. Vamot Vatla, Mot Mieng Huan Shong Fi Kong Bang Bak Jamo Mao Theonam Tang. Kojok. Dr. Bennett, you likely don't remember my name. You never said it aloud, and I didn't say yours until after we landed. I was the captain on Flight 408. I've played that flight back in my mind more times than I can admit, not just because of the press or the fallout I avoided because someone else took the brunt of it. I replay it because of the question you asked me, the one I couldn't answer. Would the same thing have happened if you looked like him? You didn't wait for a reply, but the silence was an answer, and I've carried it since. I retired last month. Not because of you, because I realized I'd been flying on autopilot far longer than I should have, in more ways than one. The hardest thing for a man in my position isn't admitting error. It's realizing how many times you stayed quiet because the system said silence was smooth flight. You disrupted that silence, not by shouting, but by holding your ground in a seat you'd earned. And by doing nothing, I let others believe you hadn't. That wasn't a neutral act. It was complicity. So I'm writing now, not for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm writing because you deserve to know that someone on the inside did see it, eventually, and didn't look away the second time. This pilot pin has been on my uniform for 22 years. I'm not mailing it because I think I'm giving it to you. I'm mailing it because it's the one thing I wore every day and never once asked myself whether I'd earned it in moments that mattered most. You reminded me that stillness doesn't mean safety, and control doesn't equal leadership. Thank you for making me uncomfortable, and for doing it with grace I didn't deserve. Wherever you fly next, may the people in charge see you clearly from the start. Respectfully, Captain. Thomas Arlo Area didn't move for a long time. She set the letter down, turned the silver pilot pin over in her fingers. It wasn't shiny anymore, but it was real, more than a gesture, less than redemption, but something rare, an admission with no expectation. She stood, walked to the shelf by her window, pulled out a small wooden box she'd never used, lined with velvet. Inside, she placed the pin. Next to a single photo, her in seat 24C, taken by someone without asking, years ago, now printed and faded. A quiet monument to a moment that shifted more than she ever planned. She closed the box, not to hide it, but to honor it. Legacy, she realized, isn't about who says your name. It's about who finally learns to say their own with honesty. Even after it's too late to fix the past. Even when no one else is watching. Even when the apology has nowhere to go but forward. That day, Arya didn't reply to the letter. She didn't have to, because some truths only need to be received, not returned. Arya once imagined a cabin that didn't exist. She called it Cabin Zero. Not first class, not economy, not business select, just human. No curtain between rows, no platinum lanyards, no assumptions made from coats or shoes or silence. Just people, seated side by side, equal not because of their status, but because nothing in the system was built to suggest they weren't. Cabin Zero had no upgrade list, no special smiles reserved for elite tags, no protocols that moved you unless you wanted to be moved. In Cabin Zero, attendants weren't trained to recognize loyalty points. They were trained to recognize dignity. They didn't say, "You need to move because someone else asked first." They said, "Is there anything you need to feel seen today?" And every name was learned before the safety demonstration, not for legal reasons, but because that was the baseline of care. There were no seatbacks more worthy than others, no tray tables pulled out for power, and no rows closer to the truth than any other. Everyone boarded at the same time. Everyone disembarked with the same regard, and no one had to film an injustice just to prove they existed. Cabin Zero didn't show up in the airline schematics. No architect drew it, no CEO greenlit it, but Arya believed in it, not as a blueprint, as a direction, because systems aren't changed by the people they reward. They're changed by the people they once erased, who stayed, who stood, who redesigned the exits. And maybe Cabin Zero wasn't a place. Maybe it was a mindset a policy, a whisper in the back of a team meeting, a new kind of checklist, a passenger who no longer felt the need to shrink, an attendant who paused before assuming, a captain who answered the question next time instead of staying silent. Cabin Zero wasn't real. Not yet, but it was closer now, because a woman once sat in 24C, got up without anger, and built a seat the system couldn't take away. What started as a seat quietly taken became a story that no one could ignore. And maybe that's the real lesson. That dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stays seated, refusing to disappear, refusing to accept less. So if you've ever been asked to shrink, to move, to make room for someone who thought they mattered more, let this story remind you, you were never in the wrong seat. The system may have been built without you in mind, but you have every right to redesign the map. Tell us in the comments, what seat did you fight to stay in? Or what moment made you realize you deserved one? And if this story moved you, even quietly, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still needs to be seen. Because sometimes, all it takes is staying seated long enough for the world to finally stand up.